Dr. Isabella Martinez, a dedicated cardiologist, had always believed that medicine was more than just a career. It was a calling, a passion, a way to make the world a better place one patient at a time. As the sun rose over the city's skyline, casting its golden light over the glass buildings of downtown, Isabella's day began like any other. She made her rounds at St. John's Medical Center, her fingers grazing the cool metal doors of the hospital rooms as she checked on her patients. But today, there was a new tension in the air. Isabella had been working at St. John's for 5 years, a place she had come to think of as a second home. The hospital was known for its outstanding cardiology department, and Isabella was one of its rising stars. But there was something, or rather, someone, that had been on her mind for weeks. A new addition to the department. Dr. Ethan Hayes, a renowned heart surgeon, had recently transferred to St. John's from a prestigious hospital in Boston. Rumor had it that he was not only brilliant in the operating room but also charming, with a quiet confidence that drew people in. Isabella had heard about him long before she actually met him. Some of the nurses joked about his swoon-worthy smile, while others whispered about his calm and compassionate nature with patients. But it wasn't just the gossip that intrigued Isabella, it was his reputation as a heart surgeon who had saved countless lives. She'd seen him in passing, a tall figure with dark, curly hair, his sharp features softened by the light of the hospital's fluorescent halls. His presence was commanding, yet he moved with such a quiet grace, it was almost as if he didn't want to disturb the delicate balance of the world around him. But that wasn't the only thing that made Isabella notice him. It was his eyes. Ethan had eyes that seemed to hold a depth that made her curious. There was something hidden behind them, a quiet intensity, an unsung story. And there was something else, the way he seemed to care about his patients. Not just with his medical expertise, but with his whole heart. Isabella had always been a firm believer in the power of empathy, and she respected anyone who shared that belief. She had seen Ethan interact with patients, talking to them in a calm, reassuring voice, holding their hands as they expressed their fears. He never rushed through a single moment. But despite their occasional exchanges in the hallway and the brief greetings, they had never truly spoken. That was until this morning. Isabella stood in the conference room, reviewing a patient's case file. She was immersed in the complexities of the patient's medical history when she heard the door creak open. She looked up to see Dr. Ethan Hayes walking into the room, his stethoscope draped around his neck. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Dr. Martinez," he said, his voice smooth and low. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Isabella stood up from her chair, offering him a polite smile. "Not at all. What brings you in here?" Ethan glanced at the case file she was holding. "I was hoping to discuss a patient with you. We've got a heart transplant candidate, young woman, mid-20s. She's been on the waiting list for quite some time, but her condition is deteriorating quickly. I was hoping we could collaborate on her case." Isabella's heart raced at the thought of working with him. There was something undeniably magnetic about Ethan, and the idea of spending more time with him, working together, seemed like both a professional challenge and a personal opportunity. "Of course," she said, setting the file down on the table. "I've been following her case. Let's take a closer look together." They sat side by side, reviewing the patient's medical history and discussing potential options. Isabella noticed the way Ethan listened carefully to her thoughts, nodding as she spoke, offering his own insights in return. The conversation flowed easily between them, with mutual respect and admiration. As they worked, she realized how much she valued his approach to medicine, thoughtful, patient, and deeply human. As the meeting drew to a close, Ethan turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "I've heard a lot of great things about you, Dr. Martinez. Your work speaks for itself." Isabella felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. Thank you, Dr. Hayes. I'm just doing my best. You're more than that, he said, his voice steady, but there was something in his eyes, an unspoken sincerity, that made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them seemed charged with something that neither of them could quite place. Was it just respect? Professional admiration? Or was it something more? Well, Ethan said, standing up. We should get back to our patients. I'll have my assistant schedule another meeting with you about the transplant. I'm looking forward to working with you more closely. Isabella nodded, trying to keep her composure. Same here, Dr. Hayes. As he left the room, she stood there for a moment, trying to steady her breath. She had worked with countless colleagues over the years, but there was something different about Ethan. Something that went beyond medicine. The following days at St. John's seemed to pass in a blur for Isabella. There was no shortage of work in the cardiology department, patients who needed urgent care, complicated cases requiring quick decision-making, and the daily rhythm of rounds. But no matter how busy she got, her mind kept drifting back to Ethan. The way he had looked at her, listened to her, and spoken to her with such respect and warmth. There was a quiet intensity to him that she couldn't shake, and it haunted her thoughts long after their meetings. She told herself it was nothing, a simple professional connection. She'd worked with countless doctors over the years, some of whom had been much more experienced, and none of them had ever affected her like Ethan did. But something about the way he carried himself, the care he took in his work and the quiet manner in which he approached life, made her heart race in ways she hadn't expected. One afternoon, as she was finishing up her last round of the day, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down at the screen and saw that it was a message from Ethan. I said, "Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime. I know this great little place near the hospital. It's quiet, and I think you'd like it. Let me know when you have time." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. Was this just a casual invitation? Or was it something more? She had always been focused on her career, never allowing herself to get distracted by anything or anyone. But Ethan's message seemed genuine, and she found herself drawn to the idea of spending time with him outside the hospital walls. She typed out a quick reply. Coffee sounds great. How about tomorrow afternoon? I'll be free after 3 p.m. Within seconds, Ethan responded. Perfect. I'll meet you there. Looking forward to it. Isabella felt a nervous excitement stir in her chest as she put her phone away. She had no idea where this would lead, but something told her this was going to be a moment she wouldn't forget. The next afternoon, Isabella made her way to the cafe Ethan had mentioned. It was a small, cozy spot just a few blocks from the hospital. The windows were fogged up with the winter chill, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Isabella stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room for Ethan. She spotted him sitting in the corner, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, his dark curls falling in gentle waves around his face. When he saw her, he stood up with a warm smile, his eyes lighting up with recognition. Dr. Martinez, he said, his voice full of warmth. I'm glad you could make it. Of course, she replied, feeling a flutter of excitement. This place looks great. Ethan gestured to the empty seat across from him. Please, have a seat. I ordered for you, hope you like cappuccinos. Isabella smiled as she sat down. I love them, actually. You're a man of good taste. Ethan chuckled, his gaze softening. I try. But I wasn't sure if you liked anything specific, so I went for something classic. They settled into an easy conversation, talking about their work, the hospital, and their shared passion for helping people. But as they spoke, Isabella couldn't help but notice the way Ethan's eyes lingered on her when she wasn't looking. The way he seemed genuinely interested in everything she said. There was no pretension about him, just a quiet, genuine connection that made her feel like they were the only two people in the room. As they sipped their coffee, Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said. "You've been at St. John's for quite a while, right?" Isabella nodded. "Yes, I've been here for 5 years now. It's been an incredible experience, really. But I've always felt there's more to learn. Medicine is like an endless puzzle, you know?" Ethan smiled. "I get that. I've always been fascinated by cardiology, too. There's something about the heart, it's like the most complex engine in the body, yet so fragile at the same time. It's a privilege to work with it." Isabella couldn't help but agree. It is. It's a reminder of how precious life is, and how we have to make every moment count. There was a brief silence between them, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment, Isabella could feel the weight of the words he was about to say. But instead of speaking, he reached for her hand across the table, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The gesture was simple, yet it held a depth of meaning that she couldn't ignore. She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of what he was feeling. And there, in the quiet of the cafe, she saw it, the vulnerability, the sincerity, the connection that had been building between them. "I'm glad we're doing this," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know we're colleagues, and we've only just started working together, but I feel like there's something more here. Something worth exploring." Isabella's heart raced. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his words. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I've never really mixed my personal life with my work before, but there's something about you, Ethan. Something I can't ignore." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside seemed to fade away as they simply sat there, their hands still lightly touching. It was as if time had slowed down, leaving them suspended in a moment of mutual understanding. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Maybe we should take it slow," he suggested, his voice tender. "Get to know each other beyond the hospital. But I think we both know there's something here. I don't want to rush it." Isabella nodded, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "I agree. Let's take it one step at a time." The days following their coffee date were a whirlwind. They began spending more time together outside of the hospital, casual dinners, walks through the park, and quiet moments where they simply enjoyed each other's company. The more they learned about one another, the stronger their bond grew. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. They spoke about their patients, their passions, and the challenges they faced in their demanding careers. Isabella was amazed by how easily she could talk to Ethan. It was as if they had known each other for years, as if their lives had always been leading up to this moment. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to let go of the walls she had built around her heart. But even as their connection deepened, Isabella couldn't help but feel a sense of caution. She had always been focused on her career, and the idea of mixing romance with work was something she had never entertained before. She didn't want to jeopardize everything she had worked so hard for. And yet, with Ethan, she felt a sense of balance she hadn't known was possible. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, Ethan drove her home. The car was silent except for the soft hum of the engine, and Isabella could feel the weight of the moment hanging between them. She knew that things were about to change, but she wasn't sure how. When they reached her apartment, Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. "Isabella, I don't want to pressure you, but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something more for you. I think about you all the time, and I want to be with you. I don't want to wait any longer." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the depth of his feelings. And in that moment, she realized that she felt the same way. "I think about you, too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared, Ethan. I've never let anyone in like this before." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "You don't have to be scared. We can take it slow, like we said. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Isabella took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been cautious, but with Ethan, she knew that this was different. This was real. With a smile, she leaned in, her lips meeting his for the first time. It was soft at first, tentative, as if both of them were still testing the waters. But as their kiss deepened, all of Isabella's doubts melted away. She knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days following their first kiss felt like a dream, one Isabella never wanted to wake up from. There was a newfound lightness in her heart as she navigated her days at the hospital, knowing that Ethan was just a call or text away. Their time together, though still cautious and slow, was filled with an undeniable connection that neither of them could deny. It felt like a natural extension of the deep respect they had for each other's professionalism, now blossoming into something more. But as much as she enjoyed the quiet moments they shared outside of work, Isabella found herself facing a dilemma. She had always prided herself on her ability to separate her personal life from her career. And now, with Ethan entering both worlds, she struggled with the idea of being vulnerable in a way she hadn't been before. There was still a part of her that feared what would happen if things went wrong, if their personal relationship affected their work. She had seen it happen before, the way emotions could cloud judgment in the high-stress environment of the hospital. Her thoughts were interrupted one morning during rounds. They had a particularly challenging case, a patient in her early 30s, suffering from severe heart failure and in need of a transplant. Isabella had been the one to initially assess the patient, but Ethan had been assigned to perform the surgery. It was a delicate procedure, and both of them knew the risks. Isabella found herself standing beside Ethan as they examined the patient together in her room. She had been doing this for years, making decisions, providing advice, offering comfort. But now, with Ethan so close to her, emotionally and physically, she realized that her feelings for him were becoming more difficult to separate from her professional judgment. The patient, a woman named Sarah, was nervous. She lay in the hospital bed, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "Am I going to be okay? I've been on the transplant list for so long, and I'm scared. What if something goes wrong?" Isabella placed a hand on Sarah's arm, offering her the reassuring smile she had perfected over the years. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure you're safe. Dr. Hayes is an excellent surgeon, and I'll be right here every step of the way." Sarah's gaze shifted to Ethan, and he gave her a calm, steady smile. "You're in good hands, Sarah," he said gently. "We'll take great care of you. And if you need anything, we're here to talk." The way Ethan spoke to Sarah was with such tenderness, such compassion, that Isabella felt her heart swell with admiration. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had chosen this career in the first place. Helping people in their most vulnerable moments was a privilege, and Ethan shared that same belief. He was more than just a brilliant surgeon, he was a man who truly cared about his patients. As the conversation wrapped up and they left the room, Isabella felt a sense of gratitude toward Ethan. But she also felt a strange sense of uncertainty. In the hospital, they had to be objective, focused on the patients, on the task at hand. And yet, her thoughts kept returning to him, to the way he made her feel. How could she reconcile the personal with the professional? Could they truly find a balance? Later that evening, after another long day at the hospital, Ethan sent her a simple text. "How are you feeling after today? I know it was a tough case. Isabella smiled as she read his message. She could feel the care in his words, and for a moment, the weight of her earlier thoughts seemed to lift. She typed, "I'm okay. Just thinking a lot about how we're balancing everything, I guess." Ethan responded almost immediately. "I understand. It's not easy. But we're doing this together. I trust you, and I think we're handling it really well." Isabella's heart softened at his words. She wanted to trust herself in this, wanted to trust him. But the thought of something going wrong, of their professional lives intertwining in a way that could hurt both of them, still lingered in her mind. She replied, her fingers moving hesitantly over the keys. "I'm just scared, Ethan. We've been working together for so long, and I don't want to risk losing that, or letting things get complicated." There was a long pause before he responded. "Isabella, I get it. I'm scared, too. But I believe in what we have. And I believe in us as doctors. We can figure this out, together. I don't want to complicate things either, but I'm not going to run from what's between us." The sincerity in his message made her feel like her heart was finally starting to find a rhythm, like the tension that had been building was easing. She felt herself letting go of some of the fear she had been holding onto so tightly. She replied, "You're right. We can figure this out. One step at a time." The next few weeks were a delicate dance, balancing their personal and professional lives. They grew closer with each passing day, supporting each other during difficult procedures and leaning on one another when the weight of their responsibilities felt too heavy. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when the fear of things becoming too complicated crept back into Isabella's mind. But with Ethan by her side, she began to feel more confident, both in their relationship and in the work they were doing. Their shared passion for medicine became a foundation for something deeper, a relationship built on trust, respect, and the desire to make a difference in the world. They took it slow, savoring the quiet moments when they could just be with each other without the pressure of the hospital looming over them. There were still challenges ahead, difficult surgeries, long hours, and the constant pull of their careers. But they were learning how to navigate it together. And then, one evening, as they sat in Ethan's apartment, sipping wine after a long shift, Ethan turned to her with a serious look in his eyes. "Isabella," he said, his voice steady. "I know we've been taking this one step at a time, but I need to tell you something. I want you to know that I'm all in. I'm here for you, both as a colleague and as someone who wants to build something real with you. I'm not going anywhere." Tears pricked at the corners of Isabella's eyes, and she felt a rush of emotion she hadn't been expecting. It wasn't just the words he spoke, but the sincerity behind them. Ethan had always been someone who acted with quiet confidence, but in that moment, she could see just how much he cared. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I've never felt this way before, but I know that I want to be with you." And with that, as the city lights glittered in the distance, they shared a kiss that was both tender and full of promise, a kiss that marked the beginning of something beautiful. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of joy, love, and shared moments. Isabella and Ethan, though both still dedicated to their demanding careers, found themselves falling into a rhythm together. They would meet after long shifts, grabbing a late dinner at one of the small restaurants near the hospital or taking walks around the city streets, their hands often entwined, as though no matter what happened in the operating rooms or in their day-to-day lives, they could always find peace in each other. Their relationship had grown stronger with each passing day, their connection deepening in ways neither of them had anticipated. Yet, as much as they were growing closer, there were still challenges that they had to face. There were times when the stress of their jobs weighed heavily on both of them, moments when the demands of the hospital kept them apart for days, and the ever-present uncertainty of working in medicine, the lives they held in their hands, reminded them of how fragile everything could be. But through it all, they supported each other. Isabella admired Ethan's quiet determination and his way of handling even the most difficult situations with grace. And Ethan, in turn, was inspired by Isabella's unwavering commitment to her patients, her compassion, and the way she made every person in her care feel seen and valued. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at the hospital, Isabella found herself in Ethan's apartment, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the sparkling city lights. Ethan was in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal, a comforting dish of pasta that she had grown to love. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, his voice warm, but tinged with concern as he walked back into the living room, placing a bowl of pasta in front of her. Isabella smiled, taking the bowl into her hands. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking, about everything." Ethan sat down beside her, his knee brushing against hers. "About what?" Isabella hesitated for a moment before speaking. "About how much I've changed since we started this. Since we've started being together. I used to think I was so focused on my career that I didn't have room for anything else. But now, I'm realizing how much more I want. With you." Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand. "I feel the same way, Isabella. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know we've had our doubts and our fears, but I'm not going anywhere. And I want to be with you. I want this, with you, for the long haul." His words were simple, but they felt like a promise of something real, something lasting. Isabella's heart swelled at the thought. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully embrace what they were building together, without reservations, without the doubts that had plagued her earlier. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I'm just scared. What if something happens? What if we can't make it work with our careers, with the hospital, with everything?" Ethan squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over her skin in a reassuring motion. "We'll figure it out. We're both doctors, both passionate about what we do. But we're also people. And we deserve to make this work, to have a life together outside of the hospital. I'm not going to let the pressures of work tear us apart." Isabella nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. It wasn't going to be easy, they both knew that. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, long nights, and difficult decisions. But with Ethan by her side, Isabella felt a sense of certainty she hadn't felt in a long time. "I just need to know that we're in this together," she said, her eyes searching his. Ethan smiled softly, his eyes filled with affection. "We are. Always." A few weeks later, a new challenge presented itself, one that tested the strength of their bond and their commitment to each other. St. John's Medical Center had been selected to handle a major heart transplant case for a high-profile patient, a philanthropist who had donated millions to the hospital. The surgery was complex, requiring both Isabella's expertise in cardiology and Ethan's skills as a heart surgeon. It was a high-pressure situation, and the entire department was on edge. As the days leading up to the surgery wore on, both Isabella and Ethan found themselves buried in paperwork, patient assessments, and the logistics of the transplant. There were long hours at the hospital, and at times, it felt like they barely had a moment to speak to each other. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Isabella found herself sitting alone in the break room, her mind racing. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As much as she loved her work, the weight of the decisions they had to make, the lives they had to save, was becoming overwhelming. Ethan walked in, looking equally drained, but his expression softened when he saw her sitting there. Without a word, he walked over and sat next to her, placing a hand gently on hers. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "How are you holding up?" Isabella gave a tired smile, leaning into his touch. "I don't know. It's just a lot right now. I can't help but feel like I'm being pulled in 100 different directions." Ethan nodded, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I get it. This surgery, the pressure. It's weighing on me too. But we've got this. We're a team. We've always been a team. For a moment, they sat in silence, letting the words hang in the air. Isabella could feel the strength of his presence, the steady, calming force that he always was when things got tough. You're right, she said, taking a deep breath. I just need to remember that we're in this together. That we're not alone in all of this. Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. Exactly. And no matter what happens, I've got your back. You don't have to carry this alone. Isabella's heart swelled as she met his gaze. In that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges they faced in the future, whether in the operating room or in their personal lives, they would always face them together. The day of the transplant arrived, and the entire team was on edge. The surgery was going to be long, complicated, and the stakes were high. As Isabella and Ethan prepared for the operation, they exchanged a brief but meaningful glance, one that said everything they needed to say. They were ready. The hours that followed were tense, filled with critical moments, but through it all, they worked seamlessly together. Their years of training and their deep understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses made them an unstoppable force. And when the transplant was finally complete, the patient's vitals stabilized, and they received the news that the surgery had been a success. The relief that washed over Isabella was immeasurable. She found Ethan standing outside the operating room, his face tired but filled with quiet pride. We did it, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You did it. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers brushing over hers once more. We did it, he corrected gently. Together. And in that moment, with the weight of the world lifted off their shoulders, Isabella realized that their love, like their work, was about partnership, trust, and the willingness to face everything together, no matter the odds. The success of the transplant brought an undeniable sense of accomplishment to both Isabella and Ethan. But, just as they had hoped, the relief from the pressure of the surgery was short-lived. Soon after, a series of more cases came in, emergency surgeries, new patient consults, and the usual chaos that accompanied their high-stakes medical environment. Yet, despite the unrelenting nature of their work, they found themselves settling into a routine that allowed them to keep their connection strong. Isabella couldn't help but notice how their relationship had shifted, how their understanding of each other seemed to deepen every day. There was something about being with someone who truly understood the weight of their jobs, the long hours, the sacrifices, the moments when everything felt like it was on the line, that made their bond stronger. In Ethan, she found not just a partner in the operating room but a partner in life. His calm demeanor grounded her in moments of chaos, and his unshakable belief in their teamwork gave her the confidence to keep pushing forward. One quiet evening, after a particularly draining week, they found themselves at the same restaurant they'd first gone to after their initial kiss. The dim lighting and quiet atmosphere had always felt like their own little world away from the hospital. As they sat across from each other, nursing glasses of wine, Isabella looked over at Ethan, noticing the way his eyes sparkled when he spoke. She had always been drawn to his intelligence, his dedication, but there was something deeper now, an intimacy she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the shared professional respect that had forged their connection, it was the way he listened to her, really listened, as though he were invested in not just the work they did but in her as a person. You know, she said, swirling the wine in her glass, I used to think that I couldn't have both, a fulfilling career and a relationship. But with you, I don't feel like I'm having to choose. It just feels right. Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice soft. I know exactly what you mean. For the longest time, I thought my work would be my whole life. But I can't imagine it without you now. You make it all feel like it has purpose beyond just the surgery and the success. It's everything. Isabella smiled, her heart full, the weight of their shared understanding blossoming between them. They were both dedicated to their craft, but they had learned to integrate that passion with the love they were building together. Their conversation shifted as they talked about their future, the one thing that had always felt uncertain but now seemed brimming with possibility. They both knew the demands of their jobs, how unpredictably everything could change. But they also knew that, no matter what, they had each other. And that was enough to face whatever the future held. A month later, a new challenge came their way, one that would test their commitment in ways they hadn't anticipated. Isabella had been approached for a prestigious research opportunity. The position was one she had worked toward for years, a chance to expand her work into the realm of groundbreaking cardiology research. The offer was compelling, promising a chance to make real change in the field. But the catch? It would require relocating to another city for at least 2 years. She had always dreamed of this opportunity, but now, with Ethan in her life, the decision felt far more complicated. The thought of being away from him for that long, of the distance and the strain it would put on their relationship, weighed heavily on her. She found herself lying awake at night, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, she found herself sitting on the couch in Ethan's apartment, the letter for the research position in her hands. He had come home from his shift earlier than expected, and his eyes immediately searched her face for any sign of what was troubling her. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with concern. Isabella hesitated before handing him the letter, watching his expression carefully as he read the offer. She could see the moment he understood the weight of it, his eyes flickering with the realization that this was a pivotal moment. "You've worked so hard for this," Ethan said, setting the letter down and looking at her. "This could be a huge step for you, for your career." Isabella nodded, but her throat felt tight. "I know. I've dreamed of this opportunity for years. But I don't want to lose what we have. What if this research pulls me away from everything? What if it tears us apart?" Ethan's gaze softened, and he reached out to gently take her hand in his. "Isabella, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm with you. You don't have to make this decision alone. You're not just a doctor, you're a person with dreams, with goals. And I want you to go after them. If this is what you need to do for your career, for your growth, I'm not going to stand in your way." Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes at his words. "I don't know what I would do without you, Ethan. You're the one person who makes everything feel like it's worth it. But I can't help but feel like this will change everything." Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice steady and confident. "It will change things, yes. But change isn't always bad. We'll figure it out. And no matter where you go, I'll be there. We'll make it work. We'll find a way." Isabella felt a wave of relief wash over her. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time, the weight of the decision wasn't so unbearable. She had Ethan by her side, and with him, there was nothing they couldn't face. They could adapt, they could grow, and most importantly, they could choose each other every day. A few weeks later, Isabella accepted the research position. The next few months were a whirlwind of logistics, goodbyes, and adjusting to the idea of being apart for an extended period. But as the day of her departure approached, she knew deep in her heart that this wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. On the night before she was set to leave, they sat together, the two of them alone in her apartment, the quietness of the moment settling between them. Ethan had taken the night off from his shift to spend these last hours together. "I'll miss you so much," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she leaned her head against his shoulder. Ethan kissed the top of her head, his arm wrapped tightly around her. "I'll miss you too. But we'll make this work, Isabella. You're following your dreams, and I'll be right here, cheering you on. Every step of the way." Isabella looked up at him, her heart aching but filled with hope. "Promise me we won't lose each other." Ethan smiled softly, a promise in his eyes. "I promise. We'll find a way." And as they shared one final, lingering kiss before she left, Isabella knew that no matter where the future took them, their love would continue to grow, to thrive, no matter the distance. The first few months after Isabella's departure were more difficult than either of them had anticipated. Though they spoke every day, whether through video calls, texts, or the occasional phone call during her busy research days, the distance between them was palpable. There were nights when Isabella lay in her apartment, staring at the empty side of the bed, missing the warmth of Ethan's presence. The city she had moved to was bustling, filled with new opportunities and challenges, but none of it felt quite like home without him beside her. Ethan, too, struggled with the distance. His shifts at the hospital were demanding, and while his work kept him distracted, there was a persistent feeling of something missing. He would wake up to an empty apartment, make his coffee, and then go to work, day after day. Though he was proud of Isabella for following her dreams, it didn't make it any easier being apart from her. He found himself longing for the small moments they had shared before, lazy Sunday mornings, quiet dinners after long shifts, and simply being near her. But both of them were determined to make it work. They had promised each other that they would face the challenges of distance with the same determination and commitment they had shown to their relationship since the beginning. And so, despite the ache in their hearts, they kept going. They had a future to build together. One afternoon, a few months into Isabella's research position, she received an unexpected text from Ethan. It was simple, but the words sent a wave of warmth rushing through her chest. The text said, "I miss you more than I ever thought possible. Just wanted to remind you of that." Isabella smiled at her phone, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She had known that the distance would be difficult, but there were moments like this, when their love felt as present as ever, that made it all worth it. She replied, "I miss you too. Every single day." The text sparked a conversation that lasted for hours, as they talked about their days, their dreams, and their plans for the future. There were times when they laughed, reminiscing about the first time they met or the way they'd always stolen glances at each other in the hospital hallways. But there were also moments of quiet, of longing, when neither of them had the right words to describe the ache of being apart. But no matter how hard it was, they always ended the conversation with words of hope. Ethan said, "We'll get through this. We're stronger than the distance." Isabella responded, "I believe that. And I can't wait for the day when this will all just be a memory. We'll be together again soon." Several months passed, and Isabella's research began to yield incredible results. She had become a respected figure in her field, and the work she was doing was making a significant impact on the way heart disease was being treated. Her days were filled with meetings, lab work, and writing papers, but there was always a part of her that yearned for the hospital halls of St. John's and the man who had become her home. One evening, after a particularly taxing conference, Isabella sat in her small apartment, feeling the weight of the months pressing down on her. She had been away from Ethan for so long, and while she was proud of the progress she had made in her career, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. That's when she received a call from him. "Hey," his voice came through, soothing and familiar, just like it always had been. "I've been thinking about you all day. How's everything going over there?" Isabella couldn't help but smile as she heard his voice. The sound of it filled her with warmth, just as it always did. "It's going well," she said softly. "The research is amazing, but I miss you, Ethan. I miss everything about us. I never imagined that this much time apart would feel so hard." Ethan's voice softened, his tone tender. "I miss you too. More than I can even put into words. But you're doing incredible things over there. And I'm so proud of you, Isabella. So proud of everything you've accomplished." I don't know if I can keep doing this, Isabella admitted, the vulnerability in her voice raw. I don't know if I can be this far away from you for so much longer. I hate feeling like we're drifting apart. Like the distance is growing instead of shrinking. There was a pause on the other end, and then Ethan's voice, steady and calm, cut through the silence. Isabella, I want you to come back. I want us to be together again. You've made your mark over there, and I know you're doing amazing things, but I think it's time for us to take the next step. Together. Her heart raced as she heard his words. For a moment, she couldn't speak. It was as though everything she had been carrying, the loneliness, the uncertainty, the longing, was suddenly being lifted. She realized that Ethan wasn't just her partner in the operating room, he was her partner in life, and no matter where their careers took them, they would always find a way back to each other. Are you saying? Isabella's voice trembled with hope. Ethan chuckled softly, as though he had been waiting for this moment too. I'm saying that I want you back here. I want us to make it work. No more distance, no more uncertainty. We've been doing this long enough. It's time for us to start our next chapter. Together. The relief she felt was overwhelming. It was as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and she could breathe again, knowing that they were no longer going to be separated by miles of space and endless work schedules. I want that too, Isabella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've been thinking about you every day, and I want to come home. I want to be with you, Ethan. I love you. I love you too, he replied, the sincerity in his voice making her heart swell. Let's make it work. Let's start our life together. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of packing, preparations, and saying goodbyes to the colleagues she had worked with in the city that had become a second home. The decision to return to St. John's was a big one, but it felt right. She was ready for the next phase of her life, the one where she and Ethan could finally be together, no more waiting, no more distance. When she arrived back in the city, it felt like a homecoming. She had missed the familiar streets, the tall buildings, and the bustling energy of the hospital. But more than that, she had missed the man who had always been her rock. The moment she stepped off the plane, her heart quickened with anticipation, knowing that she would be seeing Ethan again soon. And when they finally reunited, at the airport, amidst the chaos of travelers, there was no need for words. As soon as their eyes met, they were in each other's arms, their kiss a promise, their embrace a reaffirmation of everything they had been through together. I'm home, Isabella whispered against his lips. You never left, Ethan replied softly, his voice filled with certainty. Back in St. John's, they resumed their work, but this time, there was a sense of balance. Isabella continued her research, now with a new sense of fulfillment, and Ethan continued his surgeries, but they were able to share their lives in a way they hadn't been able to for so long. Their love, tested by distance, had only grown stronger, their bond unbreakable. They learned that while their careers would always be a part of who they were, their relationship was just as important, a cornerstone that gave them the strength to face every challenge that came their way. Together, they had built something beautiful, something worth fighting for. And as they walked down the hospital corridors, side by side, hands intertwined, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other. As the months passed, Isabella and Ethan settled into a new rhythm. Their lives, though still full of the demands of medicine, felt more balanced than ever before. They had learned how to navigate the intense pressures of their careers while prioritizing each other. The quiet moments they shared, whether it was cooking dinner together in Ethan's apartment, walking hand in hand through the city's parks, or simply sitting in silence, enjoying each other's presence, became as precious as any achievement they had earned in the operating room. Isabella's research at St. John's was flourishing, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The breakthroughs she was making, particularly in the field of cardiac regeneration, had the potential to change lives. But despite her professional success, she never forgot the importance of her personal life, of the love she had for Ethan and the support they provided each other. Ethan, too, had found a new sense of joy in their relationship. The surgeries, the pressure, the long hours, they were still all-consuming at times, but they no longer felt as daunting when he had Isabella by his side. Their shared understanding of the demanding nature of their work gave them a strength neither of them had anticipated. Yet, despite the contentment they found in each other, they still faced challenges.